let me welcome all of you and let me welcome His Excellency Hervé Delphin for his very kind, for kindly agreeing to do this with us at a time when India-EU discussions and the future of India-EU ties is being debated, discussed quite extensively. We've just had a very successful visit, some very successful agreements, very important agreements signed. From trade to defense partnership to mobility. There is too much on the agenda. It's a very forward-looking engagement between India and the EU that is being carved out. And we are here to discuss and deliberate on the trajectory of this very important relationship, but also hear from the ambassador himself, how he views the future and what else is there in the offing insofar as India and EU is concerned at a time when there is so much geopolitical flux and geoeconomic uncertainty in the mix. So, Ambassador, over to you for your initial remarks before we open this up for the audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Harsh, and for the warm welcome. I'm positively surprised to see how popular the EU has become. I think it's more the EU than me, but I'm a modest agent of change. Maybe just let me start by a quick flashback on the summit and what it meant, what it was about, before expanding on the trajectory of the EU-India partnership, but also what place this partnership plays in the EU strategic outlook. So fair to say it was. Sometimes we Europeans, we tend to be a bit too modest. We don't like to brag too much using, big, this kind of words, that. But I think this time the word historic really applied to the full meaning of the word that with this summit. This was a summit where form met substance, where symbolism, strategic significance, and content all came together. And in a way, it was a meeting of minds, a meeting on substance, and it was meeting the moment. Meeting of minds, our President von der Leyen has been on a 4th visit to India. And if only by her sartorial choice, you can see that she really is totally committed to the rapprochement between EU and India. It was not just paying tribute to the impressive handloom tradition of India. It was wearing Indian clothes had a meaning. We just agreed on FTA where we will bring to nil the tariff on textile. President Costa pulling out of his pocket his OCI card was also high in symbol about the connection between EU and India, but it also meant something. It's about mobility. So you can see how leaders connect to this agenda. And in foreign policy, if the leaders are committed and put their own will in full into a relationship, that makes a difference. It's true that it was somehow, looking back, it was a bit of an anomaly that we hadn't had a summit since 2017. And although we had supposedly a strategic partnerships in 2004, a partnership which was designed in other times, at the time of the emerging economies. And at the time, the EU signed a strategic partnership with Russia, with China, and India, and other, Brazil for that matter. In a way, we had come in different sort of periods in our relationship. But I really think that this time we hit the strategic meaning and substance of the relation right on the nail's head. When I say meeting of vision and interest, if you look at this so-called joint comprehensive strategic agenda, it really expands deepens cooperation across the whole spectrum. And I really invite people to read this document. It's not the most pleasant piece of literature, admittedly, but for those who are really interested of what is in this partnership, please read the document. There are over 100 lines of action and deliverables that have been lined up. I mean, from critical minerals to, water, agri-food, climate, clean tech, AI, semiconductors, CRMs, connectivity, name it. What I'm saying here is it's not just the mother of all, the FTAs. There is much more. So it was clearly the most visible part, the game changer, the great enabler. But don't miss the forest behind the tree. For having a mother of all, you need a caring parents. And the parents of the mother were both generous and realistic on what we could achieve. And fair to say, I think there was on both sides a clear sense of the strategic objective, and that was mastered by a strong political will of the leaders. When President von der Leyen came in February 2025, together with Prime Minister Modi, they really pinpointed the end of the year as the moment of delivery. Okay, fair enough. It went over by a few weeks, but we had the summit coming. So it was only fair to have this FTA coming as the key deliverables at the summit. But what I'm saying is realistic is that the sense that we really catered for each other's sensitive issues, sectors, concerns. We delineated quite quickly what was the achievable landing zone. We didn't try to bully each other in our red lines. And that really made the big difference, that if you think that the negotiations were launched in earnest in end of 24, beginning of 25, we managed to pull out the largest, the most consequential FTA, both for India and Europe, in less than a year, which is, by standards, quite amazing. I'm hearing people who say, yeah, but this FTA has been on negotiation since 2006-8. I say, please, we are in different environment. Don't read it in a form of continuity, There is no continuum, in other words, between the first FTA, and I always said it's FTA 0.02, what we negotiated. An FTA tailored to the needs of the moment and reaching potential. So what I'm saying is the FTA is a great game changer in terms of impact for the economies. It's also a great enabler because it comes together with all the elements of the comprehensive agenda. We want to develop startups partnerships, innovation hubs, blue valleys. Not many people picked up on the blue valleys, but I'm happy to dwell upon that point. But the fundamental point here is that we are lining up all the elements that can bring together closer our respective ecosystems, economic ecosystems. Linking together research, innovation, mobility, skilling, investment, manufacturing. And this is why comprehensive is true to the word. It's comprehensive and it's integrated. And if you look at the 5 pillars of the strategic agenda, they complement each other. They are built in synergies. So what you have, don't treat it just as a long list. There is strategic design in this document. And that's why it is a new strategic agenda. It's larger, deeper, but strategic in its concept. So it will really allow us to leverage our complementarities, And I think we can really clearly offer each other market scale. I think it's fair to say also it's really designed for mutual benefits, not only to generate jobs, investment. And as I mentioned, it really looks to all different relevant supply chain. As I mentioned, clean tech, biotech, AI, semiconductors. We are also building on the strong foundation of the Trade and Technology Council, which is this. We only have it with the US and India. And we will intensify the work of this venture precisely in building strong verticals in key supply chains of mutual interest. We are also, both sides recognize that we have a mutual interest in cooperating in critical minerals and building supply chains that can help precisely the energy transition and support our industrial ecosystems. There is, as you mentioned, security and defense partnership. We signed about 9 of them. The first was with Japan. The last is with India. And there are a few more coming. Think of the security and defense partnership as a political enabler. The EU has been signing such agreements with partners. It feels it has the comfort, the trust to engage deeper in security and defense cooperation. Again, it's worth visiting what the documents lay out in terms of areas of cooperation. It will strengthen what we already have in place, deepen policy dialogues in areas like and cooperation in areas like counterterrorism, where we are really very active. Cyber, and we know that cyber, in any future warfare, the first area or field of combat will be cyberspace, even before the physical space or airspace, cyberspace. Space, which is a new domain that we launched last year, the first space dialogue. The first meeting took place, both in its security and civil component. We have also cooperation at a very operational level. We have used seminars, workshops, closed doors, of course, to bring practitioners of both sides to work on concrete manners, is what it means to face the terrorist use of drones, how we address, and we will have another workshop on hybrid threats, which is another front line of in terms of in the security and threat landscape. But we also have maritime security, which is probably the area where we are the most advanced. And it's not just about, port calls. It's not just about military exercise at sea. We experienced last year real tactical cooperation at sea. We don't brag about it. We don't shout it on the roofs. But this is where basically we are now, where we have mutual interest in having an Indian Ocean free of piracy, free of illegal trafficking, and that could represent choke points for our supply chain. We are even going further than, surface. We are going undersea. We are looking at cooperation on the protection of critical undersea infrastructures and cables. We have both an interest. If you think it corresponds to what we are doing with IMEC. We are working together on IMEC, on the supply lines, the logistics, but you have to protect them. One of the two projects we have under IMEC One is called Blue Raman, which is a digital cable coming from Europe to India, with branching out to Africa, that will connect India and Europe, or Europe and India. You also have to protect your assets. So undersea protection of infrastructures is a major aspect. Last but not least, defense industry cooperation. So while the security and defense partnership is the political enabler, we will sign this year a security of information agreement, which will be the legal enabler. That will allow us, among trusted partners, to exchange classified information that pertains to all forms of cooperation, including on defense industry projects. And the last stage of it will be the defense industry itself, where our two ecosystems will come closer together. We already had a visit of the Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers coming to Brussels. They made the equivalent. And we will have more of these exchanges. And be clear, the fact that we have it at the EU level is complementary to what India has at the bilateral with member states. So we add another layer, and this layer is all what is done by the EU by the EU member states at the EU level. And I will come back to that. Both sides have committed themselves to a fast-paced implementation of this partnership. So, you know, sometimes when people reach the summit, literally, after there is a sort of deflation moment, I can tell you there will be no such things as far as we're concerned. Implementation will be a strategic project in its own right. We already had less than a week after the summit, where as a deliverable, we said the launch of the exploratory talks on the association Horizon Europe. Horizon Europe is the largest research program in the world. It's about 93 billion of euros. And we only have a few members, a few third countries associated, and we have proposed to India to join. I mean, I would not leak any information by saying that these exploratory talks that took place were very upbeat, and so much upbeat that we look forward to the signing of it by the end of the year. We also have next week the opening of the office, the Legal Gateway Mobility Office, which is a construct, although mobility is mostly member states' competence, but here member states and the EU together consider that it is having such an office will be an enabler for legal mobility between India and EU as a tool that can facilitate the matching between supply and demand. So this will be inaugurated next week by European Vice President Virkunen and EAM Jaishankar. In the coming weeks, we're going to have the security and defense dialogue elevated. In a few months, we will have the TTC ministerial taking place. In the margins of an international meeting in June, our leaders are expected to meet to take stock of the implementation. And I can tell you, there will be no lost day for ensuring great progress. And we are confident that by the end of the year, there will be already a first batch of clear deliverables on the summit announcement. So we chose, if you want, to have our partnership delivering at scale and at speed. No leeway. And we will really bring together our two ecosystems. And this is why I'm saying it's not just, we decide. No, the mobilization of the two ecosystems, the two systems of administrations is really genuine. And if I can take any measure, we had last week a closed door India-EU forum organized by Ananta. I think there is only 3, US, Japan, and EU, that probably means something also, that the EU joins a club of the most trusted and closest strategic partners for India. There was a lot of excitement, a lot of interest, and a lot of mobilization. So it's not, just the thinkers. There were the practitioners looking at all the potential across different sectors. So I think what we've seen here is what I would call the political maturity of our partnership, where we are really fully engaged into it. And when you think of the EU side, please think it in terms of the Team Europe, the EU and its member states. There's been a lot of internal work done between member states and the EU to work in sync, to work together, align expectations, come together here in India and act in a complementary fashion. I mean, if I look at the incredible diplomatic activities in India this year, in only 7 to 8 weeks, time flies, it's quite impressive. But what is particularly impressive is the intensity of the EU-India channel. And this is what when I penned recently an opinion, I call it the India-Europe Express, because I think it goes full speed. And I think as much as you have your own reform express, I can see that the India-Europe Express is really in full swing. So, and it's not just our perception. When Dr. Jaishankar said that the relation with the EU and its member states is the fastest growing partnership for India, I think he put it right. And because we see it likewise on the European side. It has a huge significance in Brussels and capitals. There were different meetings of leaders. India now is on the top talking points. And I can also observe that Europe is also part of the top talking points here in India. So in a way, why are we there? And this is why I'm saying we met the moment. It's a meeting of the moment. Because in politics, circumstances matter. But here we were somehow blessed because we had a full alignment between the will of the leaders, the vision, the plan of what we wanted to achieve, the agency on both sides to design the strategic agenda, and indeed the circumstances that gave it a boost. So I read many comments about, yes, EU and India are here simply because of the fortunes of geopolitical developments. Let me put it bluntly, this is really short-sighted analysis and short-view political analysis. This does not fall from the sky. Those who have been in the operating room have been busy over the last years. And I'd like just to rewind a bit. And it happened, we had the same cast. Costa, von der Leyen, Modi. It was in Porto, 2021, still during COVID. Antonio Costa was then Prime Minister of Portugal, and they had an hybrid meeting where they decided to relaunch the FTA. And it was a moment where already on our radar, India was moving up. 1 year after, 2022, President von der Leyen was the chief guest of Resina Dialogue. On that occasion, she announced not only the effective launch of the FTA negotiation, but she also announced the creation of the TTC. In 2024, it was election year, both here and in Europe. But in the political manifesto of the new commission and the new president, a new strategic agenda with India was flagged as one of the top priorities for the EU. In early 2025, the college led by President von der Leyen came to Delhi. So as I often say, we walked our talk. And then during 2025, we prepared the ground for what was our internal policy document, what we call a communication that we prepared, we shared with the member states and the European Parliament on a new strategic agenda for our relations with India. And this document was so positively received by India that India felt comfortable with this document as the basis for negotiating our joint strategic agenda. And then come the summit. So if one says it's just because of the last year's dynamics, please revisit your analytical work. It comes from further than that. In fact, what has happened is the dynamics we've seen over the last couple of years, and certainly over the last year, have simply vindicated and validated the strategic choices made. Nothing else. And clearly give them further boost. And if you look at the why, in the great geopolitical and geoeconomic reshuffling that we are witnessing, India and EU are certainly in different positions. And certainly geographically, that's a fact. But at the core, we face similar challenges. Our economic development and our security are under stress. Our visions of a rule-based order and cooperative order is being challenged. So we both respectively become even more familiar in learning and applying the new geopolitical grammar. De-risking, diversification of supply chain, diversification of partnership, economic security. From the EU side, for the reasons I explained in the rewinding a bit the history of where EU came from, I think there was a deeper assessment of what we can offer to each other in terms of de-risking and offering and how we could combine our respective strengths, because we are utterly complementary. And this is where basically we have met the moment. This is also where I'd like maybe leaving for a moment the EU-India, just to come about the EU itself. I think it's important for you to understand that the EU you have now is way different from the EU that was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And it's interesting, there is this famous sentence by Dr. Jaishankar, 2021, it's time to engage America, manage China, cultivate Europe, reassure Russia, bring Japan into play, draws neighbors in, which was some recognition that Europe needed more attention. And that has been, I think, said candidly and honestly by the Indian side, that probably the EU has been far too long neglected. And there is no judgment on that. It's simply that we changed so much over the last 10 years. If you think in 2016, we faced a series of shocks. There was one internal, Brexit. There was the Trump 1 administration that defined the parameters of the transatlantic relation in different ways. We also had China really making deep forays in the European economy to the point of buying critical new technology companies. And that is what has triggered this sense of, the Sorbonne speech of President Macron, or Chancellor Angela Merkel saying we need to take our destiny in our own hands. So you have this journey on a European side. And then you got the COVID. There was one element specific also to Europe in 2015 and 2016. We faced one of the most important migratory crises in history. But if you were to that after the COVID, that put a stress on the supply chain, and then the Russian aggression and invasion of Ukraine on our borders, just imagine the series of shocks through which we've been living. So for us, in a way, it has been a journey of a reality check compared to the traditional DNA of the EU, which has been open economy, open society, fully wedded to the transatlantic alliance with its security and defense dimension. So it was a complete shock. But gradually, we have developed our tools. We've been on the move from screening of FDI, anti-coercion instruments, and one by one, we have adapted. It's the fact that EU has always grown through crisis. It has never gone back, it has grown. We put out the next generation 850 billion loan to boost our economy. While before that we could use and leverage a EU budget for a loan, that was anathema. We had recently the Readiness 2030, which is about European security defense industry, 800 billion, including 150 billion loan for joint procurement. So what I'm saying, and of course we had all the internal accelerator on our economic competitiveness, so the famous report Letta and Draghi. So what you are witnessing is a military rearmament of the EU, an economic rearmament, and a societal rearmament. We've been told too long that we don't know how to practice and work the language of power. Even if it was not in our DNA, we are starting to adjust. And so that explains also a lot if I come back to EU-India. Because India has a whole history of strategic autonomy. Europe is moving towards this characteristic of strategic autonomy. We just had yesterday a retreat of the heads of state and government of the member states in the suburbs of Brussels, precisely to discuss these kind of issues. And they had one on security and defense before Christmas. So in that context, emerging as a pole of power, of agency, somehow became also increasingly appealing to India. I think neither India nor the EU wants to be boxed into a G2 or G3 world. India has vested interest in having a strong European pole as much as Europe has a strong interest in having a strong India as a pole in the multipolar world. So this is where the strategic equation is coming together. So what you've seen with this historic summit is just coming together all these different dimensions, and I think what made it really historic. The circumstances of necessity, of de-risking, but also the circumstances of choice of coming together, emerging as two partners from different geographies, but increasingly converging strategic interests, mindful of their differences. We are not seeking alignment. We are working on our complementarities and our convergence. And enough maturity to accept that we have differences, but nevertheless we can move forward. This is what I call a mature strategic partnership. I will leave it there.
Thank you, Excellency, for both laying out the contours of India-EU partnership as was exemplified in the recent agreements, but also giving us a wonderfully nuanced intellectual argument as to why the relationship is where it is today. Because I think at times when we think of, and at times the problem in this relationship has always been that despite its potential, it was not hitting the right note. And today, when the notes are in play, I think there is a symphony that is being created, and hopefully that will lead to more melodies coming out of this relationship. I'm being a bit flowery here, but I think in some ways, those of us or those who have observed this relationship had always complained about the lack of strategic element in the relationship because it was driven by the sheer logic of largely economics and trade and markets. And I think once the strategic element became part of the conversation, a lot of things fell into place. I have a few things that I thought I would talk to you about and then open this up to the audience. One is that you did mention this, that look, it is premature or almost banal to suggest that the relationship is where it is today because of what has happened in the last 1 year or so. But I will still like you to address this question of Mr. Trump and how he has impacted Europe and European thinking, as well as this dynamic that at times when you look at the free trade agreement, for example, and you rightly pointed out that, look, this has been a long in the making, but of course it was not being, it was not coming to fruition. But in a way, when we look at this idea of strategic autonomy, you mentioned derived largely from, India has had, an engagement with this idea for a long time. Europe is trying to come to terms with it. How important is the Trump factor in defining that? And do you think that this is, when you talk of transatlantic relationship, this is a temporary aberration, or this is going, or already you mentioned some long, structural changes that are happening in Europe. Do you think you or Europe would be able to sustain these long-term changes, even in the absence of Mr. Trump?
The first iteration of discussion on strategic autonomy in the EU started with security and defense in the early 2010s. It was a bit of an outlying thinking at the time, coming mostly, admittedly, from the French, who have a sort of tradition, a Gaullian tradition in that respect. But the idea was that you need to have a strong European pillar in the NATO. So you're not calling into question NATO as the collective security and defense agreement, but we need to shoulder and do our own homework. And if anything has to be drawn positively from Trump one, was precisely this. For too long, we've been complacent to live under the umbrella of the US and not necessarily to adjust in terms of our own, the so-called peace dividend. And if you look the metrics of our defense budget, it was going down, 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 down. If you're interested, I can give you a few figures on where we are now. We are in the order of 380 billion collectively in terms of defense budget. Since 2020, it has increased 60%. 60%. So our defense budget are going like this. So there is a complete reversal in terms of defense spending. We are reinvesting, rearming, literally. So I think Trump 1 had this salutary effect on Europeans to just say, there is burden sharing, and fair enough, we've been too cozy, too comfy living and taking sort of the benefits of the US security umbrella. But the second accelerator of strategic autonomy for us was the China factor. The economic impact of China, by the sheer scale of how it has ramped up its manufacturing capacity, it has simply eroded the European solar panel industry in a few years. We were leaders in 2010s, we are nowhere anymore, but just a few percentage. This subsidized economy where they can produce at scale with subventions, with the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises, this dumping effect on the global economy means that now we moved from a situation of a relative trade deficit to a situation where we have over 300 billion trade deficit. And India has over 100 billion trade deficit. The fact that also China leveraged this economic power for dominance, in a way what people call weaponization of dependencies, also came as a shock. So the whole agenda of economic security, which doesn't mean closing, it's not protectionism, it's protection. There is a nuance between protectionism and protection. We are for protection, we don't want protectionism. We are an economy which has been traditionally open. If you think we are the world's largest trader, if you put together all what we do, has anyone an idea of what the volume of EU's global trade in the world is? It's 7.87 trillion. It's massive. So just to say that we don't want to cut the global supply chain, but we had to protect. So no protectionism, but protection. So that was a massive change for us. And that was coming from China. It's what we call the China shock. And we have even now a second China shock in the way they can choke the system on CRMs, on solars, on batteries. There was another shock, which was the Russia's aggression of Ukraine. I think in India, there was probably not enough understanding and perception how much the security of our member states, of the EU itself, was at stake. It's on our borders. And you don't need to rewind too long in history to see how much there's been a historical threat perception was coming from Russia when it was under another name, the Soviet Union. And it's not that it's not written on the wall forever. There was a moment when Europeans and Indians and Russians were trying to engage. There was a partnership between Russia and NATO. Russia was part of the G8. We had a strategic partnership with Russia. So we have never considered our neighbor Russia as a historical enemy by design, a history, and it still has to stay. Simply the act that Russia has taken, invading a neighboring country, bordering European territory, EU territory, that has started to present a massive security threat. So here the question of our own defense become even more, pregnant for us. It was a real issue. So it was not just the question of the principles of violation of the UN Charter, it's the defense of our territory. And when you see drones flying over our airports, when you see rockets falling on our soil, this is not theoretical, this is concrete. And I don't think there has been enough awareness and understanding in India about the direct threat that Russia, through its act, has posed to the EU. So that was the second moment. Trump too, has certainly created, I think, a reality check for many around the world. You can read the national security strategy and the national defense strategy to understand and unpack where the changes lie. So I think it's important also to read it carefully. Europe remains engaged with the US, like India. We have 1.4 trillion of commerce between the two of us. We are the largest investor in US, and US is the same. So the degree of integration between our economy is such that you can't even think of decoupling them, or at the cost of a massive negative economic impasse for either parties. And we are not in that game. In terms of our own security, yes, this is taking a more, let's say in the true sense of the adjective, a more dramatic, in the sense of drama, tone by the strength of the challenge, the magnitude of the challenge for Europe to accelerate its efforts in strengthening its defense. But even though we are in this situation, we are not talking about an independent European army. This is not the talk of the day. But a stronger pillar of the NATO, yes. And let's see how things will evolve. But you know, there is this saying that hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And that I think this is where we are. So I think that's the elements. On the FTA, the EU has 44 FTAs with over 70 partners in the world, as I gave some figures. So doing FTAs has been there, and it's not a reaction to Trump. It's the continuation and even the acceleration. And what is interesting is the number of partner countries which want to have an FTA with us, because they see us as reliable, predictable, level playing field, and win-win. We're on the long run. We don't flip, on a dime. We don't change the scriptures of documents. We don't, we are stable in that respect. And every FTA we've had has generated massive mutual benefits. With Korea, plus 90% in our trade. With Japan, over the matter of few years, plus 25%. So be sure that for India, although we are the largest trading bloc for India at present in goods, if you put together with services 180, I'm sure with this FTA we will double at least. So it's a massive proposal, economic proposal also for India.
Two more questions before I ask others to join in. One is related to, there was a very interesting statement President Macron made recently that Europe should start behaving like a global power. Now, if you can give us a sense of what that means in operational terms, what kind of a global power if EU or Europe wants to project itself as, because we know in the past there was a lot of focus on the normative dimension. All the things that you have said seem to be a reassessment in terms of that norms plus something else as well. So if you can give us a sense that if that is the way Europe wants to go, what kind of a global power are we looking at here? And B, which is related to, I think, partly with this question, we are looking at the kind of pressure that is being brought on to Ukraine by Washington. We are looking at some kind of a denouement for in this conflict. Somewhere there are the negotiations going on. Ukraine has indicated that it is willing to negotiate, although we continue to see Ukraine being bombarded at this point. So in that context, where does EU see this conflict going, and are you optimistic that this is also coming to some sort, the war is coming to a conclusion soon, or do you see the instability being a permanent feature of the European landscape, especially because between Europe and Russia there needs to be some sort of a dialogue about the future security architecture in Europe? Are you confident that you have moved in that direction in the last few months, or is it something, or are we stuck where we were early on in this conflict?
I'll start by the second question. I mean, if you look at the Kiel Institutes, which is the tracking expenditures, military expenditures in the context of the Ukraine. I think I even have here, let me see, I have it on my phone. There was a very telling picture that shows, if I could project, the orange is the US spending, the blue is the European spending for Ukraine, both military and financial and humanitarian. What you see is that the funding continues and the EU has totally substituted to the US. So if anyone has any doubt about where, if the EU is putting skin in the game, just look at this graphic. Because it's about our security. Ukraine is a candidate country. It has a huge economic potential. By the way, India, before the war, had more students in Ukraine than in Russia. Before the war, India has a lot of business in Ukraine. And I think it's not inconceivable that India should look at Ukraine as a potential market, both for reconstruction, as a stateway for Europe as well. So for us, the question of ceasefire, settlement, peace, whatever you name it, this cannot happen if there is no lasting and just peace. And this is the problem. We've been talking this language. President Trump has been trying to push with putting all his weight into it. And look where we are. We've got a defiant President Putin that always shifts the goalpost. He's not interested at all. You always find conditions, excuses, if, buts. Do you see him genuinely engage in peace? Since encourage, if I can do a very bad play on words, he's felt encouraged to bomb civilian infrastructures even more. There are 40% of Ukrainians today that live without electricity in the middle of the winter. Schools closed, hospitals not able to operate because Russians are targeting the public infrastructure and the power grid. Do you accept that? We don't. And I think the courage and the resilience of the Ukrainian people is incredible. And we will not let them, and we will ensure that they are in a position to negotiate peace also on their terms. And if they have to make compromise, they have to decide what compromise, not to be imposed. Because of this graph, I tell you, everything that concerns Europe should be with Europe at the table. We have also many reasons. You refer to the security architecture of the European continent to be concerned. So we need to be at the table. But what we see is Russia simply bypassing Europeans and thinking that he has only to negotiate with Trump. So as much as I would like that next week or the week after, we'll commemorate 4 years of war in Ukraine, I would wish this is the last time we commemorate that. I would wish that there is a pathway towards peace. It will probably come, it will come at some point because you cannot remain on state of war. But I think that would require even more pressure to make Putin change his calculus. That if he thinks that he can win simply by the power of his troops on the ground, and by the way, if you think the narrative that Russia is winning the war, again, this is propaganda. If you look at the statistics on how many soldiers are dying, the statistics are even worse than ever. Because they want to protect the material is being decimated, they put the people further. If you look at the Russian economy, it's on its knees. They've made for some time Maskarova, changing the statistics, but it is biting. So at some point, there will be a moment where I think people will have to settle the scores. Are we there? I don't think we are there now. Maybe in a year's time, I do not know. But as far as the EU is concerned, is that we will continue as long as it takes to support Ukraine in its militarily, economically, financially, and on humanitarian. On global power, there was so much talk in the past about Brussels being an economic power giant and a political dwarf, and exerting the so-called Brussels effect. So basically, we design norms for our single market, and not by design, but more as a sort of functional spillover, they became global norms or standards because people aligned to that. Which speaks a lot about how Europe was more focused on itself than on the world. I think, and we were also criticized for that. Normative imperialism. How do you dare to impose your, even Europeans did not reflect on being imperialist in that terms. They were just putting their norms, and because of our economic weight, some considered these were good standards. And each time we have done this for our own internal market, and we place our regulation on our economic operators, it has externalities that can become irritants. Think of CBAM. Think of the EU deforestation regulations. So I think the first measure of power, global power, is to recognize those externalities and to integrate them into your way you project yourself. And I think the Europeans are doing this. I think it's more in the way we do things where the change is, being more strategic. And I think what we've done with India speaks so much about the new kind of Europe you face. The way we approach the war on our borders is way more strategic. It's a muscular. If you think that in terms of the total sum of defense that we are putting, I think we are coming close to what China is putting. It doesn't mean that, some people say, you're going to have several bonsai armies. The expression bonsai armies. Well, I think it was for long a bit of a common pastime to mock at the EU. I think we will quietly come to terms with our own weaknesses and vulnerabilities and come stronger. But what is important is the posture. We will defend ourselves, but we have no imperialist agenda. It's rather the reverse. There are 9 countries that want to join us. We are not trying to take land. It's people who want to join us. And why? And this is where we Europeans sometimes we do not realize what we are and what we represent. We are probably the area, the region in the world where the quality of life, the standards of life, the quality of economy, the quality of education is the best, the quality of infrastructures. When you ask anyone in the world, you prefer to go to China, live in the US, or live into Europe. And by the way, it's interesting to see how Europe is way more appealing to Indians. Last year, I think there was a record over 1.1 million applications, visas, coming from India with a rate of approval of 85%. And all what we are doing in the strategic agenda will accelerate legal mobility. Skilled workers, researchers, businessmen, and even for tourists with the so-called Schengen visa cascade. With those who have a proven track record, we will be able to do longer visas. So people have also to realize that is changing. And this is why I also take great comfort that the EU-India relation will not just be a story of government to government or business to business, but also one of people to people. You will see more mobility of Indians going to Europe, more European universities establishing campuses here, circular economy of talents, with European or Indian companies taking their staff from India to Europe and bringing it back to India, or vice versa. So I think that is also nourishing the relationship. And I think all this come together, design the contour of what is a global power.
It's time to conclude this very, very interesting session. And I'm sorry, there were a number of you who raised your hands, and I hope you get a chance to meet the ambassador separately. If not today, then sometime soon. I think he's doing a lot of outreach. So hopefully the Europe Express will travel around India in Delhi, and we will get to hear and learn more. But thank you, Ambassador, for joining us this afternoon, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Please join us for tea.